It was a quiet morning in the village of Olo, nestled between the rolling hills and lush forests that surrounded the land. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden glow over the earth, and the birds sang their early songs as the villagers went about their daily routines. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh dew on the grass, and the faint promise of something new. In the heart of the village stood its bustling market, a place where merchants and traders from all around the region gathered to sell their wares. The market was a vibrant tapestry of sounds. The chatter of people haggling, the rhythmic clinking of metal as blacksmiths hammered their craft, and the sweet earthy scent of fruits, vegetables, and spices from the many stalls. The market had always been a place of community and tradition, where people came not only to buy goods but also to share stories, pass on knowledge, and celebrate the rich cultural heritage of the village. But one bright and early morning, there was a disturbance in the usual rhythm of the market. A new face had appeared, and it was unlike any the village had seen before. Amara, a tall woman with striking features and an air of quiet confidence, had set up her small station at the far edge of the market. She was not just another vendor. She was a hair braider, and her booth was surrounded by curious onlookers. The people who had visited the market that morning were puzzled. No one had seen her before, nor had they ever heard of anyone traveling from nearby villages who braided hair with such skill. She sat quietly, her hands moving deftly through the long locks of hair she was braiding. She was completely focused on her work, her fingers weaving intricate patterns as if the hair was a canvas and her comb a paintbrush. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, and there was something captivating about the way she braided. The women who had come to the market that day had also stopped by, drawn by the beauty of her work. They peered over the shoulders of the women sitting in her chair, watching as Amara's hands created beautiful and intricate styles that seemed to shimmer with an almost magical quality. Each braid, each twist, appeared to hold an elegance they had never seen before in their village. No one had ever braided hair in such a way, so flawless, so delicate, yet so bold. As she worked, Amara did not speak a word to anyone. She didn't greet the villagers or make small talk with her customers, who were now growing more curious about this woman. Some of the older women in the market began to whisper among themselves. "She doesn't talk. Not even a single word," said Mama Igioma, the village's most seasoned hair braider, who had been in the trade for as long as anyone could remember. "I've never seen a braider like her. She just sits there working in silence." "She must be mute," replied Olamide, another woman who had been watching Amara work. "Perhaps she's been like this for many years. Maybe something terrible happened to her." The whispers spread like wildfire, and soon the villagers had settled on a name for her. The Silent Braider, they began to call her. And though no one knew much about her, her quiet presence in the market was enough to draw the attention of everyone who passed by. By midday, a long queue had formed around Amara's stall. Women, young and old, were eager to have their hair braided by the Silent Braider. It was strange, even for those who had seen many hair braiders come and go over the years, to see so many people lined up for a single person's services. Amara had become a mysterious force in the village, and the women who had waited their turn, despite the long hours of standing in line, were mesmerized by the results. Some of the older hair braiders, like Mama Igioma and Adama, watched from their own stalls with growing jealousy. They had seen the influx of customers that Amara had brought in. Their own businesses had suffered as women now preferred to queue for hours at Amara's station, rather than sit with their longtime braiders. The once bustling stalls of the established braiders sat empty, and they were beginning to feel the sting of competition. "It's unfair," Mama Igioma grumbled to Adama. "How does she do it? Why are they all flocking to her? What's her secret?" Adama shrugged, her face tight with frustration. "I don't know. She doesn't talk, and there's something unsettling about her. But we can't deny it, her braids are beautiful. It's like she's weaving something magical into them." The two women exchanged knowing glances. They had both seen the transformation in their village before, when a new vendor came along offering something unique, and they feared what it might mean for their own livelihoods. Amara continued braiding, never breaking her silence. She seemed to communicate with her customers only through the art she created. There was something otherworldly about her. The braids she created weren't just a means of decoration or style, they carried a sense of power. Women would sit down at her stall with tired, weary faces, and by the time Amara had finished, their faces were transformed. They stood taller, walked with newfound confidence, and smiled in a way they hadn't before. As the days turned into weeks, Amara's reputation spread far and wide. Her name was known in every home in the village, even to the neighboring towns. More and more women came to the market, waiting in line for hours just to experience the magic of her braids. And each time, Amara remained as quiet and enigmatic as ever. No one knew where she came from. No one knew what had brought her to their village. All they knew was that her braids were like nothing they had ever seen before, and her silence seemed to weave its own kind of mystery and power into every strand of hair she touched. It wasn't long before some of the villagers began to feel uneasy. As Amara's influence grew, the other braiders, though silent in their anger, began to question her. They had seen how the women came back time and time again, offering praise and admiration. But something felt wrong. What is she really doing to their hair? Adama asked one evening as they watched yet another long line form in front of Amara's stall. It's more than just braiding. The women are different after they sit in her chair. They seem almost entranced. Mama Igioma, too, had begun to feel the unease creep into her thoughts. She had never believed in superstitions or the strange, magical tales that circulated in the villages, but she could not deny the strange energy that surrounded Amara. Every woman who left her stall seemed to radiate a kind of power, a kind of presence that made others look twice. In their hearts, the other braiders knew something was off, but they couldn't quite place their finger on it. The villagers, caught up in the allure of Amara's work, couldn't have known what lay beneath the surface. They didn't realize that Amara's braids, though beautiful, held more than just a unique style. They carried a dark secret, one that no one would uncover until it was too late. Her braids were not merely designed to impress. They were crafted to trap, to bind, and to control. For now, however, the villagers were blinded by the beauty of her work. They didn't question the long queues, the silence, or the strange energy that seemed to pulse from her stall. They didn't know what Amara was truly doing to their hair. But the winds of change were stirring in Olo, and soon, the truth would come to light in a way none of them could have ever imagined. Amara's days were spent in the bustling heart of Olo Market, where she meticulously braided the hair of anyone who sat before her, each strand woven with precision and grace. To the villagers, she was nothing more than a silent, enigmatic artist. But beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor, Amara harbored a dark secret.
She knew that her skill was not merely a gift of craft, it was part of a deeper, more dangerous power. Each day, after the sun dipped below the horizon and the market emptied, Amara would leave her small stall and make her way to a secluded hut deep within the dense forest that bordered the village. It was a place few ever visited, hidden from sight by thick vines and towering trees. The hut seemed ordinary from the outside, a simple structure made from wooden beams and thatch. Yet, inside, the air was thick with a strange energy that pulsed beneath the surface of reality. Upon entering the hut, Amara would pause for a moment, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The only light came from dozens of candles arranged in a circle, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows against the walls. The hut smelled of incense, earthy, rich, and thick with an ancient aroma. The walls were covered in intricate symbols, drawn in an unknown script that seemed to shimmer faintly as if they were alive. These markings told stories of dark magic and ancient rites, passed down through generations. But no one in the village had ever seen such symbols before. In the center of the room stood a large, antique mirror, its surface cracked and worn with age. It was framed in dark wood, twisted with carvings of mythical creatures, serpents, birds, and strange faces. The mirror was the key to her power, a conduit through which Amara could connect to forces that existed beyond the realm of the living. Amara would approach the mirror and sit cross-legged before it, her expression calm yet filled with purpose. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the incense that seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Her fingers hovered over the surface of the mirror, tracing the symbols etched in the wood. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to chant. The language she spoke was ancient, older than the village itself, older than the land they stood on. It was a language of spirits, a tongue that had been passed down through forbidden practices. The words held power, the kind of power that could bend the very fabric of reality. As she spoke, the air around her began to crackle with energy, thick and almost tangible. The faintest hum filled the room, vibrating in the air like the deep rumble of thunder on a distant horizon. As Amara chanted, the strands of hair she had braided during the day seemed to come alive. They were no longer mere locks of human hair, they were vessels for the spirits she had captured. One by one, the braids floated gently into the air, suspended in front of her like a series of glowing orbs. The candles flickered as if responding to the presence of something far beyond this world.
Each braid glowed faintly in the candlelight, the strands shimmering as though they were woven from threads of silver. Amara reached out, her hands moving with grace and purpose. She touched the strands gently, whispering words into the air. The braids trembled, their very essence trembling under her touch. It was a ritual that Amara had performed for years, and each time, she grew more powerful, more connected to the ancient forces she called upon. The braids held more than the hair of her customers. They held their spirits. With every weave, Amara had bound a part of her customer's essence, be it their vitality, their luck, or their joy. The braids were traps, carefully crafted to siphon the energy of the women who wore them. Amara's whispering intensified, and the spirits within the braids responded. They were not hostile, but they were trapped. Once Amara had completed her ritual, the women whose hair she had braided would begin to feel the effects. Slowly, over time, they would notice their luck changing. Their fortunes would wane, their health would deteriorate, and their joy would fade. Amara, on the other hand, grew stronger. She felt the energy flow through her, invigorating her, renewing her vitality. With every strand of hair, she became more powerful, her connection to the dark forces deepening. She no longer needed to eat or sleep as much, her physical body was sustained by the energy she siphoned from her victims. To the villagers, Amara was a savior, a mysterious artist whose braids brought beauty and grace. They never suspected that behind her silent demeanor was a mind focused on only one thing: power. Her customers were blissfully unaware of the dark forces at play. They sat in her chair, entranced by the fluidity of her hands, unaware that each strand she wove was a thread that would slowly unravel their happiness, their fortune, and their very essence. Amara's success was her greatest weapon. The villagers believed they were simply receiving a beautiful hairstyle, unaware of the pact they had unknowingly entered into. They trusted her hands, her quiet presence, and the beauty of the braids she wove. Little did they know, they were feeding her, and she was growing stronger with every passing day. Every night, as the ritual was complete, Amara would rise from the mirror and step back, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. She knew the consequences of her actions, and she reveled in the power it gave her. The villagers could never understand what she had done, not unless they uncovered the truth behind her braids, if they ever dared to ask the right questions. But Amara was clever. She had carefully cultivated her image, her silence, her quiet mystery, and it was enough to distract anyone who might have suspected something amiss. She played the role of the humble artist, the silent woman who could do no wrong. She kept her intentions hidden behind a veil of beauty and craft, using the villagers' ignorance to her advantage. As the days passed, the villagers continued to flock to her, eager to experience the magic of her braids. Each braid carried a piece of them, each braid was a link in the chain that bound their spirits to her, their lives intertwined with hers in ways they could never comprehend. And Amara, in the stillness of her hut, would prepare for the next day's work,
knowing that with each new braid, her power grew ever more formidable. But the truth, as it always does, had a way of slipping through the cracks. The villagers, though they had no idea, were beginning to change. Some would speak of strange dreams, others of unexplained illnesses. The braids, once seen as a symbol of beauty, began to take on a darker significance. Slowly, the threads of Amara's manipulation would unravel, and the villagers would find themselves caught in a web far more intricate and dangerous than they could have ever imagined. In time, someone would come to understand what had happened, and when they did, they would learn the terrible truth of what Amara had been doing on their hair all along. But by then, it might be too late. The villagers had become her vessels, and it would take more than mere words to undo the power she had bound to them. The once bustling hair-braiding corner of Olo Market had transformed. What used to be a vibrant place where women gathered to gossip, share stories, and get their hair styled, now felt quiet and empty. In the past, customers had eagerly flocked to the regular braiders for the familiar hands of trusted artists who had braided their hair for years. But now, there was a shift. Day by day, the long lines at the market shifted toward Amara, the mysterious new braider who had captured everyone's attention with her talent. The others could only watch from the sidelines as her stall overflowed with customers, while theirs remained eerily still. Among the braiders who watched with growing frustration was Ngozi. A fiery woman in her early 30s, Ngozi had been braiding hair in the market for over a decade. Her fingers were nimble, her skills unparalleled, and her customers were loyal. But that was before Amara arrived. At first, it was subtle. Ngozi noticed how the villagers began to speak more about Amara, her silence, her perfectly braided designs, and how they felt so different after sitting in her chair. Some claimed to feel lighter, others said they felt luckier, as if Amara's braids were a key to a newfound fortune. And the stories were infectious soon. Even the most skeptical women in the market were curious. Ngozi, who had always been the center of attention, felt a deep sense of frustration. It wasn't just about losing her customers, it was about the way they spoke of Amara as if she were some mystical being, someone with powers she could never hope to match. There were rumors that Amara didn't accept money, that she had an eerie, unspoken charm about her. One day, Ngozi overheard a conversation between a group of women who had just visited Amara's stall. "She doesn't even take money. They say she just looks at you and your problems disappear," one woman said. "I can't explain it, but I felt lighter as soon as I left her stall," another woman replied. With each passing day, Ngozi's suspicion deepened. How could one person have such an effect on everyone? How could she be so perfect at braiding, with every strand precisely aligned, every twist and turn of her handiwork flawless? Ngozi's own skill, honed through years of hard work, seemed to pale in comparison to Amara's effortless perfection. But it wasn't just Amara's braids that disturbed her, it was the strange aura that surrounded her. Amara's silence was unsettling. She never spoke to her customers unless necessary, and even then, her voice was soft, almost like she was whispering in an unknown language. Ngozi had watched Amara closely for weeks, trying to catch a glimpse of the secret that lay behind her success, but it was as if the woman were a puzzle that could never be solved. She was the very embodiment of mystery, and it drove Ngozi mad with curiosity. One evening, as the sun began to set, Ngozi watched Amara pack up her stall. The market was beginning to empty, but Amara remained focused, weaving the final braids of the day, her face blank as usual. Ngozi felt a sense of urgency, something was off. Amara was never there for long after sunset. She would always pack up and leave quickly, disappearing into the darkening streets without a word. This strange behavior only fueled Ngozi's growing sense of unease. Determined to uncover Amara's secret, Ngozi made a bold decision. She would follow Amara. She knew it was risky. If Amara caught her, it would look suspicious, but the desire to know the truth outweighed the fear of being caught. As the market grew quieter and Amara finished her final customer of the evening, Ngozi took a deep breath and began to follow at a distance. She kept to the shadows, staying out of sight, but her eyes never left Amara. The moon had just risen, casting an eerie glow over the marketplace as the last few villagers scattered to their homes. Amara moved with an almost unnatural calm, walking through the streets with purpose, her eyes fixed ahead. Ngozi's heart pounded as she quickened her pace, careful not to let Amara see her shadow moving behind. Amara's path led her out of the village and into the thick forest that bordered Olo Market. The trees loomed high above, their branches tangled in a web of dark, knotted limbs. Ngozi's breath quickened as she realized that Amara was taking the same route that no one in the village ever used after dark. It was a path few dared to walk, as the forest was thick and filled with mysterious legends. But Amara moved through it with ease, as if she had walked this path countless times before. Ngozi pressed on, now feeling a cold shiver creep down her spine. The forest was dense, and the shadows seemed to whisper around her. She tried to stay close, but the thick underbrush and the darkening night made it harder to keep track of Amara's every move. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a clearing. Amara stopped in front of a small, hidden hut that Ngozi had never seen before. It was covered in thick vines, its wooden walls barely visible through the dense growth. Ngozi crouched behind a nearby tree, her heart pounding as she watched Amara disappear inside the hut. For a long moment, Ngozi just stood there, unsure of what to do. The mysterious woman, who had so captivated the entire village, had finally revealed a place where she went after the market closed. A place hidden from the eyes of the public. Amara's braids had seemed perfect, too perfect to be normal. And now, this. What was inside that hut? Ngozi knew that she had stumbled upon something much larger than she had expected. Amara's secret was not just about her braiding skills, it was about her power, a power that seemed to come from some dark and mysterious source. She had to know more. But Ngozi also knew that to get answers, she would need to tread carefully. She couldn't let Amara know she had followed her. She would need to wait for the right moment, to gather more information and learn the full extent of what was really happening. With a sense of urgency, Ngozi turned and retreated into the shadows, her mind racing. The jealous seed that had been planted in her heart now grew into something darker, a thirst for knowledge and a burning desire to expose Amara for what she truly was. But one thing was certain, Ngozi had uncovered the first clue in a mystery that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined.
The strange pull to uncover the truth pushed her forward, urging her to act, despite the dread that seeped into her bones. She crouched low behind a nearby tree, moving slowly and quietly, peering through a small crack between the vines. Through the narrow gap, she caught her first glimpse of the interior of the hut. What Ngozi saw inside the hut made her blood run cold. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles arranged in a circle around the space. Shadows danced on the walls, casting strange, shifting shapes that made the entire scene feel unreal, as if she were watching something from another world. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. It was framed in dark wood, carved with intricate symbols that Ngozi did not recognize. The mirror's surface shimmered unnaturally, almost as if it were alive, rippling in the dim candlelight. Amara stood before the mirror, her body still and focused. In her hands, she held several strands of hair that she had braided during the day. The strands floated in the air around her, glowing with an eerie, ethereal light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the flickering of the candles. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Ngozi's heart raced as she watched Amara slowly chant in a language she had never heard. The words were soft, almost like a whisper, but they carried an undeniable power. As Amara spoke, the floating strands of hair seemed to move of their own accord, curling and twisting in the air as if they were alive. The longer Amara chanted, the more vibrant the glow became, until the entire room was bathed in a strange, otherworldly light. Ngozi held her breath, not daring to move. Her eyes were fixed on the bizarre ritual unfolding before her. She watched in frozen horror as the strands of hair began to dissolve, breaking apart into thin wisps of smoke that drifted toward the mirror. The mirror, which had already been shimmering with an unsettling glow, now appeared to swallow the hair whole. Each strand disappeared into the glass, leaving behind no trace of its presence. It was as though the mirror had consumed the very essence of the hair. Ngozi's mind raced. What was happening? Why was the mirror absorbing the hair? And what did it all mean? As the last of the glowing strands vanished into the mirror, Amara stopped chanting. She stood there for a moment, her face expressionless, her eyes locked onto the mirror's surface. A chill ran down Ngozi's spine as she saw something shift in the reflection, something that didn't belong. For a split second, the mirror seemed to ripple again, as if it were no longer a reflection of the room, but a portal to another world. For a brief, horrifying moment, Ngozi thought she saw the faces of people she recognized. It was as if their spirits were trapped inside the mirror, their eyes wide with fear and helplessness. Amara smiled faintly, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. She turned away from the mirror, and the glowing strands of hair that had once floated in the air now hung limp in her hands, as though drained of life. Ngozi could barely believe what she had just witnessed. She had uncovered the dark secret that Amara had hidden from everyone. The hair she braided was not just styled, it was bound, consumed, and used to feed some kind of dark, sinister power. And the mirror was where it all went. It was clear now, Amara was not just a talented braider, she was performing rituals to steal the life force of her customers. Their spirits, their luck, their very essence, was being trapped and siphoned away. The weight of the discovery hit Ngozi like a tidal wave. She felt sick to her stomach, her breath shallow with panic. She had to leave. She had to get out of there before Amara noticed her presence. Her mind was racing, and her legs moved on their own accord as she backed away from the hut, her heart pounding with terror. As she turned to run, she nearly stumbled in her haste. The dark forest seemed to close in around her, the trees whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the village, the familiar sight of the market square offering her a small sense of comfort. Breathless and trembling, Ngozi stumbled into her small house, locking the door behind her. She collapsed against the wall, her mind reeling from the horrific discovery. How could she explain what she had seen? Who would believe her? The other braiders, the villagers, they all loved Amara. She was the mystery that everyone adored. The idea of her being involved in something so sinister seemed impossible. But Ngozi knew what she had seen. She knew the truth, and it terrified her. She wanted to scream, to warn everyone in the village about the darkness that had taken root in their midst, but she also felt a deep sense of fear. Would they believe her? Or would they call her jealous, mad, or worse, dangerous? The secret that Amara had hidden so well was now out in the open, but Ngozi was unsure of how to expose it without putting herself in danger. How could she stop Amara before it was too late? Would anyone listen to her warnings? The weight of the discovery was unbearable, but one thing was clear, the village was in grave danger, and Ngozi was the only one who knew the truth. But soon, the feeling of unease was undeniable. Those who had visited Amara to have their hair braided began to experience unsettling dreams that left them feeling empty and restless upon waking. It began with a young woman named Ada, a kind-hearted mother of two who had visited Amara's corner to have her hair styled for the village festival. Ada had heard the praises sung about Amara's talent, and when it was her turn in the queue, she felt an odd sense of anticipation. The braider's touch was gentle, but something in her silence was off-putting, like an unspoken weight that lingered in the air. That night, Ada fell into a deep sleep, only to be thrown into a dark and suffocating dream. She found herself standing in an endless void, a vast expanse of darkness stretching out in every direction. Her feet were heavy, as if bound to the ground by some invisible force. Ada opened her mouth to scream for help, but no sound came out. She reached out into the darkness, but her hands met only air, empty, cold air. There, in the distance, she saw a faint figure. The silhouette of a woman stood alone, her back turned. Ada tried to approach, but with each step, the figure seemed to move farther away, just out of reach. Desperation clawed at Ada's chest. She knew this woman. It was Amara, the silent braider. But Amara's face was shrouded in shadow, her features indistinguishable. Ada's heart pounded as she tried to call out, but her voice was silenced by the crushing void. She was trapped. When Ada awoke, the daylight felt distant and foreign. She gasped for breath, drenched in cold sweat, her heart still racing from the dream's intensity. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The darkness, the feeling of being utterly alone, the cold absence of sound, it all felt real, as though she had actually been somewhere, been someone else in that strange, suffocating world. Ada's husband, Chijioke, noticed the change in her immediately. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. "I saw her," Ada whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw Amara. She was controlling me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It felt like she was inside me." Chijioke frowned, brushing his wife's damp hair from her forehead. "You've been working too hard lately, Ada. Perhaps the stress of the market and all the preparations for the festival is taking a toll." But Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The dream felt too real, too vivid to be a mere product of stress. It felt like a warning. Ada's unsettling dream was just the beginning. Over the following days, more women who had visited Amara began to report similar experiences. Some said they found themselves trapped in dark, endless spaces, unable to escape, while others spoke of feeling drained and hollow, as if all their strength had been sapped from their very souls. An older woman named Ngozi, not to be confused with the jealous braider, told her daughter she had dreamt of Amara, standing at the edge of a cliff with her back turned, waiting. In the dream, the wind howled, and the earth trembled. As Ngozi approached her, she could hear the faintest of whispers, but they were incomprehensible, words that made no sense yet felt full of malice. In the mornings, these women woke up exhausted, their bodies weak, and their minds clouded with a sense of foreboding. But despite this mounting unease, no one made the connection. They all thought it was simply a coincidence. After all, they had been sleeping soundly until their visits to Amara, hadn't they? By day, the effects of Amara's braids were even more pronounced. The women who had visited her began to feel a strange, persistent fatigue. Tasks that once felt easy, like walking to the market or tending to their children, became monumental struggles. Their steps slowed, and their spirits sank lower with each passing hour. What was once bright and vibrant about them, their laughter, their energy, their joy, was replaced with a heavy, unshakable lethargy. Yet no one could trace it back to the braider. In fact, Amara's name remained untarnished, and her reputation only grew. Those who had their hair braided by her spoke of feeling refreshed, their spirits uplifted, despite the strange dreams and heavy exhaustion that lingered throughout the day. It was as if they were under a spell, entranced by Amara's art and her quiet presence. But no one dared to ask the crucial question, why was this happening? Ngozi, of course, knew exactly what was happening. She had been the one to witness Amara's dark ritual. She knew that the strange, glowing braids, the unearthly chanting, and the way Amara manipulated her customers' hair were no accidents. The hair was more than just a means of beautification, it was a conduit for something far darker, something that siphoned away the energy, the very essence, of those who wore the braids. The dreams, the lethargy, the strange void that the women felt trapped in, it was all a result of the energy Amara had taken from them. Their spirits were bound to the braids she wove, prisoners of her hidden power. But Ngozi, despite knowing the truth, remained silent. She could not find the courage to speak out. The villagers had already begun to see her as nothing more than a jealous, disgruntled woman, someone who couldn't bear the sight of her competitor's success. What would they think of her now if she came forward with a story like this? Who would believe her? Still, deep inside, Ngozi could feel her fear growing. She watched as more and more women visited Amara, and with each passing day, the village seemed to grow quieter, more subdued. The laughter in the market grew fainter, and the usual bustle of activity seemed hollow. The women who had been to Amara's corner appeared more distant, as if they were lost in their own minds, staring off into space with vacant eyes. Ngozi couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that things were spiraling out of control. She knew that she could no longer stay silent. She had to warn the others. But how? How could she confront Amara, the woman who had cast a spell of calm over everyone, who seemed to control the very fabric of the village's harmony? The answer seemed elusive, but one thing was clear: the dark influence of Amara was spreading, and soon, the village would no longer be the same. Uchenna was a wise elder in the village, known for her sharp mind and deep understanding of the old ways. She had witnessed many changes in the village over the years, from shifts in tradition to the arrival of new people. But recently, she had observed something troubling. The women who had been visiting Amara, the mysterious new braider, had grown quieter, their laughter less frequent, their spirits dimming day by day. Something was wrong, but no one could put their finger on it. Uchenna's sharp eyes missed little. She could see that something had changed in the women who had once been so full of life. Where once they had been cheerful, full of energy and laughter, they now seemed tired, distracted, and withdrawn. Their eyes lacked their former brightness, and their movements had become slower, more deliberate. But the most unsettling change was in their silence. No longer did they chatter excitedly about their work or their families, and their conversations seemed to lack the joy they once shared. As the days passed, Uchenna's concern grew. The market, once lively and full of the sounds of bartering and gossip, had become quieter. People seemed to be avoiding each other, and there was an odd, almost oppressive air hanging over the village. Uchenna knew that something had to be done, she could feel it in her bones. Amara was at the heart of it all, with the wisdom that came with age and experience. Uchenna knew she couldn't sit idly by. She decided to investigate, but she knew she had to be careful. Amara's power was subtle, and revealing herself too soon could risk exposing her suspicions prematurely. The villagers were already suspicious of Ngozi, who had spoken out against Amara, and Uchenna did not want to be seen as another woman driven by jealousy or fear. So, she made a plan. The next morning, Uchenna went to the market. She had a purpose in mind: to become one of Amara's customers. She approached the braider's corner, where the usual line of women stood waiting for their turn. There was no turning back now. Uchenna had to understand what was happening. She smiled as she approached Amara, who, as usual, was silent, her hands moving with the precision of a master. "Good morning," Uchenna greeted her, her voice warm but purposeful. "I would like to have my hair braided." Amara looked up from her work with a brief nod, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she gestured for Uchenna to sit down. As Uchenna settled herself onto the stool, she couldn't help but notice the intense calm that seemed to envelop the braider. There was something otherworldly about Amara, her silence, her focus, the way she worked so swiftly and efficiently. It was as if she wasn't just braiding hair, but weaving something deeper, something darker. As Amara began to braid Uchenna's hair, the elder kept her senses alert. She studied the braider's movements carefully, her trained eyes taking in every detail. Uchenna noted the way Amara's fingers danced through the strands of hair, her movements smooth and fluid, almost hypnotic. But it was the quiet murmuring under her breath that caught Uchenna's attention. Amara's lips barely moved, but Uchenna could hear the faintest whispers, words in a language she didn't recognize. The cadence of the chant felt wrong, like a soft incantation, laced with power. It wasn't just a simple braid, it was a ritual. Uchenna's heart quickened as she realized that Amara wasn't braiding hair in the ordinary sense. She was binding something, something far beyond the physical strands of hair. That night, Uchenna's suspicions were confirmed. As she lay in her bed, the weight of the day's discoveries pressing on her mind, she fell into a deep sleep. The dream came to her swiftly and with startling clarity. In the dream, Uchenna found herself standing before a massive, ornate mirror. The reflection was unlike anything she had ever seen. Instead of seeing her own face, she saw Amara, standing tall and poised before the mirror, surrounded by floating strands of hair. The strands glowed faintly in the dim light, twisting and turning as though they were alive. Amara's hands moved gracefully through the air, manipulating the hair like an invisible force, weaving it into intricate patterns. Uchenna tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but no words came out. She was mute, trapped in the dream, a mere observer. She could feel a strange pull, an energy that emanated from the mirror and the floating strands. As she gazed into the reflection, Uchenna saw the faces of the women who had been braided by Amara. Their eyes were wide with fear, but they couldn't move. They were trapped in the mirror, their spirits bound to the glowing strands. Uchenna's heart pounded as she realized the truth. Amara was using the braids to trap the spirits of the women. The mirror was not just a reflection, it was a prison. The women had become part of her ritual, their very essence bound to the braids she wove. And with every braid, she grew stronger. Uchenna woke with a start, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She sat up in bed, her mind racing. She knew now what Amara was, and what she had been doing all along. The quiet braider was not just a skilled artisan, she was a sorceress, a practitioner of dark magic. The strands of hair were not just symbols of beauty, they were tools of manipulation, siphoning the life force of the women she braided. Uchenna's instincts had been right. Amara's power was not from mere skill, it was from the dark forces she controlled, the magic she wove into the braids with each and every whisper. Uchenna felt a deep sense of urgency. She could no longer wait. The village was in danger, and she was the only one who had the knowledge to stop Amara before she claimed any more victims. But how could she confront her? How could she expose a woman who had woven herself so deeply into the fabric of the village? With newfound resolve, Uchenna made a vow to herself. She would gather the courage to confront Amara. She would free the spirits of the women trapped in those glowing strands of hair, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Amara's reign over the village was coming to an end, and Uchenna was determined to be the one to bring it to a close. But the path ahead would not be easy. She would need to be clever, to outwit the sorceress, and find a way to break the dark spell that had taken hold of the village. The next morning, Uchenna went to the village square. She did not speak to anyone, but her eyes were sharp. She knew what needed to be done. She had seen the truth. The village could not remain under Amara's influence any longer. It was time to act. Uchenna gathered the group of villagers who had begun to notice the strange changes in the women after visiting Amara. Among them were Ngozi, who had been the first to question Amara's methods, and several others who had seen their friends and family members transform into shadows of their former selves. Together, they stood in front of Amara's corner in the market, their hearts heavy with anticipation. Today was the day they would confront her and expose the dark power she had secretly wielded over them all. Uchenna's voice was calm but resolute, carrying the weight of wisdom and experience. Amara, Uchenna called, her voice cutting through the usual morning bustle of the market. We need to speak to you. Amara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she saw the group approaching. There was no denying it now. The villagers were finally waking up to the truth, and the once comfortable silence in which she had worked was now being threatened. She rose from her stool, her fingers instinctively curling into fists. But she said nothing. Uchenna stepped forward, her eyes locked with Amara's. You've been taking more than just our hair, she said firmly. You've been using us, binding our spirits to your braids, draining our vitality, and feeding off our lives. Your charms, your dark magic, it all ends today. There was no immediate response from Amara, no denial or admission. She simply stood there, a cold silence hanging between them like a heavy fog. But Uchenna could see the flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or fear, in her eyes. Whatever it was clear Amara was not going to let her accusations slide easily. The villagers, who had gathered behind Uchenna, stood in stunned silence. It was one thing to suspect something was wrong, but now, they could see for themselves that Uchenna was serious. They had all felt the gradual changes, the weariness that settled into their bones after each visit to the braider, but no one had connected the dots, until now. Amara's eyes seemed to darken, her lips pressing into a thin line. She wasn't going to speak. She wasn't going to defend herself. Uchenna could see the control Amara had exerted over the village in the way the people avoided looking her in the eye, the way they hesitated to take a step forward. They had all been under her spell for too long. Amara, don't stay silent now, Ngozi added, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. You can't hide forever. We know what you've been doing with our hair. We know you've been using it for your own dark rituals. Still, there was no response from Amara. Her expression was unreadable, but her fists clenched tightly, and Uchenna could see the battle raging within her. She was calculating her next move, deciding how to handle this confrontation. For a moment, the market seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Uchenna stepped closer to Amara's station. Her keen eyes scanned the area, looking for something, anything, that could prove her accusations. She moved slowly, purposefully, her eyes darting over the tools and items Amara had accumulated. Then, her gaze landed on a small wooden bowl where customers placed their coins. It seemed innocuous at first, just a place for tips. But Uchenna felt something tug at her intuition. Without hesitation, Uchenna reached into the bowl. Her fingers brushed against something that didn't feel like coins. She pulled her hand out, revealing a collection of small, intricately crafted charms made of hair, beads, and twisted strands of thread. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before. There was no mistaking it now, the charms were part of the ritual. Each one was a piece of a person, a fragment of their essence, woven into the magic Amara had been casting. The crowd gasped in shock. The realization dawned on them all at once, Amara had been keeping these charms, these pieces of their souls, as trophies of her power. They weren't just paying for a hairstyle, they were unknowingly giving up parts of themselves. Amara's face twisted in fury, her eyes flashing with an intensity that was both terrifying and wild. She had been caught, and she knew it. But instead of crumbling under the weight of the villagers' accusations, she made a decision. With a swift motion, she grabbed the closest strand of hair from her basket and tied it into a knot. The knot glowed momentarily with a sinister energy, and without a word, Amara turned and fled. After her. Uchenna shouted, her voice commanding the villagers into action. They gave chase, their hearts racing with the need to stop Amara before she disappeared entirely. Amara ran through the market and toward the dense forest that bordered the village. The trees, gnarled and thick, seemed to close in around her as she ran, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive with each step. But the villagers were relentless. Led by Uchenna and Ngozi, they followed her into the woods, their footsteps heavy on the forest floor. But Amara was fast, too fast. She darted between trees, moving as if she were part of the forest itself, her form merging with the shadows. The villagers struggled to keep up, their breath coming in ragged bursts. They had to reach her before she escaped entirely. The forest seemed endless, with trees towering above them like ancient guardians. The deeper they ran, the harder it became to see. The sunlight was filtered through the thick canopy, casting the forest in an eerie, twilight glow. It was as if the forest itself was protecting Amara, hiding her from the villagers who had once trusted her. But Uchenna's resolve was unwavering. She had seen Amara's true nature, and she wasn't about to let the sorceress slip away. With each passing moment, Uchenna felt the weight of the village's safety on her shoulders. If Amara was allowed to escape, she would continue to weave her dark magic, feeding off the lives of the villagers. Just as the villagers thought they were closing in on her, Amara vanished. She disappeared into the shadows, as if the forest had swallowed her whole. One moment, she was there, running ahead of them, the next, she was gone, leaving no trace behind. The villagers stood in the clearing, breathless and defeated. They searched the area for any sign of her, but it was as if she had never been there at all. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Uchenna knew that Amara had vanished for now, but she also knew that this wasn't the end. Amara would return, she had to. The village had seen too much to let it slip away. but for now, they had won this battle. The villagers, though exhausted, began to make their way back to the village, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily in their hearts. They had confronted the sorceress, exposed her dark secrets, and chased her into the forest. But the true work was yet to come. They would need to cleanse the village, rid themselves of the magic that had bound them, and find a way to heal the women whose spirits had been trapped in Amara's charms. The air felt thick with a lingering, oppressive energy. In the center of the room stood the large, ornate mirror. Its frame was carved with symbols, ancient, intricate, and foreign, while the surface seemed to shimmer with a faint, otherworldly glow. Uchenna stepped forward, her breath steady but filled with urgency. She knew that this was the heart of Amara's power. The mirror was no ordinary object, it was a vessel, a conduit through which the spirits were captured, their vitality siphoned away. Uchenna reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the cool surface of the mirror. For a moment, she felt a strange pull, an energy that seemed to draw her in, as if the mirror itself were alive, trying to consume her. She quickly pulled her hand back, realizing just how dangerous the object truly was. "The spirits are still trapped inside," Uchenna murmured, her voice heavy with sorrow. "This mirror is the key. If we destroy it, we can break the spell." Ngozi stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "How do we destroy it? How do we free them?" Uchenna took a deep breath. She had studied the ancient traditions of their people, the old ways of warding off curses and undoing magic. There was one method she knew that could break the spell, a ritual that involved fire and water, the forces of purification and renewal. The mirror, she understood, had to be shattered, its remnants scattered into the river. Only then would the spirits be freed. Uchenna instructed the villagers to gather wood and kindling from the forest, preparing a large bonfire outside the hut. As the fire began to crackle and grow, Uchenna stood before the mirror, her voice low and firm as she chanted the ancient words. The villagers watched in silence, their hearts filled with both hope and fear. They knew this ritual was their last chance to save their loved ones. As the fire roared behind her, Uchenna raised her hand, invoking the spirits of their ancestors to guide them through the ritual. "By fire, we cleanse. By water, we release," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. With a swift movement, she reached for a heavy stone and threw it against the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards flying across the room. The mirror exploded, its dark power splintering into 1,000 pieces. As the mirror broke, the trapped spirits were released. The air seemed to grow lighter, the oppressive energy lifting as the spirits of the women who had been bound to the braids and the mirror began to fade, their voices echoing in a chorus of relief. Back in the village, the women who had once felt trapped by Amara's magic began to stir. Ada, the young mother who had dreamt of Amara's control, awoke with a start. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and lightness. It was as though a storm had passed, leaving only calm in its wake. The same transformation happened to the others. Women who had been drained and disoriented now felt a surge of energy return to their bodies. They stood taller, their eyes bright, as if they had been given a second chance at life. The fatigue that had plagued them vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of freedom. By the time Uchenna and Ngozi returned to the village, the sun had begun to set. The fire in Amara's hut had burned down to a smoldering heap of ashes, and the forest was eerily quiet. The villagers gathered around the central square, their faces filled with both relief and joy. When they saw the women, restored and vibrant once again, the air filled with cheers and tears. They embraced one another, their spirits healed, and the heavy burden that had hung over the village for so long finally lifted. The village was free from Amara's curse. Ngozi and Uchenna stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the reunion with quiet pride. They had faced down the darkness together, and together they had broken the spell. The village would never forget the bravery of those who had stood up to Amara's magic and uncovered the truth.